Patrick Bond, professor and political sociologist at the University of Johannesburg, joins us now for more on those ongoing tensions between Iran and the United States. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I want to start off with sanctions in Iran. There are still sanctions that have been imposed on Iran, and those revolve around their nuclear program, which some say is controversial. Iran says they're not doing anything untoward. Why are those sanctions still there? Is the world being unfair?
Well, it's such an interesting time. Thanks for having me, Juliet, and greetings to the viewers. Because if you go back about 45 years or so, what you'd find is the beginning of the sort of hostility of the West, and it culminated in 1980, late 1979 to be precise, with the revolution in which Iranian Muslim militants came to power. And then the United States had their embassy overrun. And until about November, I think it was in 1980, just after the election of Ronald Reagan, where the outgoing president, Jimmy Carter, basically lost because of these hostages that had been taken in the US embassy. That meant that sanctions really got tough right away. And they culminated, I think, not only with the bombing that the United States did on basically 3 nuclear energy, and these were basically plutonium sites in 3 sites in June last year. But also another experience that Iran has had is the de-dollarization, that is being shut out of the SWIFT system and having to trade with partners in very difficult circumstances. They've had oil, and that's been the main way in which they've survived that. But the sanctions have really been biting hard in recent weeks and months. In fact, that's really one of the crucial explanations for how this huge protest movement has emerged in recent weeks. It's because of that desperation. We've seen it so many times in the last months, haven't we, in places like Madagascar and Morocco, Tunisia, Kenya, Zambia, Tanzania. We've seen the mix of politics and economics, where that desperation by a vast majority of the society then bubbles up. And I think that's what now, mixing with geopolitics, makes it incredibly difficult for the Iranian regime to come out of this unscathed.
I was actually going to ask you what is behind these protests. Give us a bit more information on that.
Well, from what I understand, we've really got different factions. We've certainly had the feminists of Iran demanding their basic human rights, and that resulted in major protests, and men supporting those women were then basically executed. Women were put down very severely, and this was in recent years, but particularly peaking in 2022. And then we've seen in the last few weeks a mix of different ideologies. For example, as we've just heard, there is a son of the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who was overthrown in 1979 after ruling the society after the US overthrew a democratically elected president in the 1950s. And with that overthrow and with that son going into exile, there is a movement, you can hear it on the streets, to bring back a monarchy. However, there's also a movement for, again, the feminist and progressive, sort of the left project, and they've got a candidate. And she may then be the sort of potential person who would come in and pick up the leadership. That is Mariam Moghdas. And what probably we'll find is a debate there about whether these progressives, who have just lost about 500 people within the protest movement, another 2,000 arrests. The third option, if the regime cannot hold on, is a military coup. Now, whether the US and Israel take advantage of that, and as Donald Trump is warning in recent hours, actually bomb Iran. And we've seen what the Israelis can do. They could really decapitate a great deal of the Iranian elite, as they showed last June. However, the Iranians can fight back, and they may have kept their nuclear technologies and their plutonium. They may be able to do enormous damages. They attempted to do that, if you recall, last June, by bombing a United States military base, the biggest in the Middle East, in Qatar. And of course, they also bombed Israel. So this could become a very messy situation. And on top of that, we have Iran's allies We used to include Venezuela in that group, no longer, but certainly Russia and China. And then we have here in South Africa the Iranians with a military exercise, a naval exercise. So it's a very complicated situation.
Now, Iran in the past has clamped down on protests, but at this time, it seems like the protests are continuing their protests. They are brazen and they are not backing down. Why is that? Is it because of what the United States has said, that if any protesters are hurt, it'll pounce?
Without the internet, because one of the things that the Supreme Leader Khamenei has done is shut down internet and telephone services. We don't really know the extent to which there's an ideological force that is connected to Donald Trump and promoting that sort of external support, versus whether we can see something that comes more from organic-based movements, the movements that were rising up, suppressed, and now are rising again, combining the feminism of Iranian women with economic justice demands. So it's hard to say at this stage. But I think the main thing is that we have to, kind of keep an eye out on a mix from bottom up for the sort of justice and democracy and secular politics that especially women have been leading on the one hand. But on the other hand, the threat that there may be a return to a monarchy by popular demand, the desperation is clear. And then we have from top down the US. And Donald Trump has become, let's say, a bit of an unhinged and rogue leader. And his threats are not only in the last few hours against Iran, but also he's brought in Venezuela. He's controlling Venezuela, he thinks. This is a debate. He's also bringing in Cuba and even Greenland and Colombia, and he's had his eyes on the Panama Canal and even threatened Mexico. So we're looking at a very unstable situation. Yes. I think it's at this stage where we have to really hope that those in the rest of the world get together and say, no, we must actually stop this before it really gets out of control.
I appreciate your time, Patrick Bond, professor and political sociologist at the University of Johannesburg, chatting to us there about the protests in Iran.